Hey everybody, welcome back. It's episode 12. Yes, it's our Mardi Gras show, right? We should have beads and stuff. Maybe a float could go by in front, right? Yes, it's our Mardi Gras show. We'll all celebrate. People will wake up tomorrow with their head hurting. And today, supply chains, how you get stuff. But first, what's going on? Well, we had e-week, and today we've got supply chains. We're in chapter 6 of the textbook, if you're reading along. We'll move to chapter 8. Assignment 2 is due Wednesday 3/1, along with previously mentioned Mardi Gras celebration recovery. Okay, so I did get a couple of emails, so I know people are out there working on it. Great. Okay. So, we had Engineer Week last week. We had the Dean's Advisory Council in town pointing out lots of things we could be doing. Always helpful. You should be working on it. Great idea. I'll get right on it. Of some popular interest, after our celebration last week of our noble profession and all that, tomorrow night, the IISE chapter is having a meeting. They're looking for people to volunteer to help with Industry Night, which will be happening in April. If you live in the area and you want to come to Industry Night, or you just want an excuse to come to Las Cruces, stay tuned. Right? Industry Night's always fun. We get a bunch of regional industry type people, some speakers, adult type dinner, not pizza, that kind of thing. Okay, Greg Smith from UPS is looking to hire IEs. He's going to be in town on March 15th on campus, so you might stay tuned for information about his visit. Sarah Gibson, who's president of the IISE chapter, has been negotiating with Greg. He's been emailing me. He was here last semester. People enjoyed meeting him. They got a lot going on there at UPS, so definitely worth taking a look at if you were thinking work. Definitely not a place to go if you were thinking hang out in cubicle and drink coffee, or Red Bull as you prefer, Diet Coke. Okay, so today we're going to talk about supply chains, and I call your attention to the Friedman quote on page 315. This is the Thomas Friedman who writes books and hangs out on the op-ed page of the New York Times. Yes, the world is flat. Another self-appointed expert on all things. Thoughtful, not thoughtful. Says supply chains can't tolerate 24 hours of disruption. It's like pouring cement down your oil wells. Back in medieval times, or at least the 1930s, 40s, thereabouts, 20s, for example, many engineers went to work for steel companies. Steel companies, when they started up those furnaces, didn't just turn them off. Right? Get the heat going, it just keeps going. Same idea. No brakes, no nothing. So, supply chains are important. and definitely of some value to study. Most of the stuff we're talking about, inventory, has to do with the idea of supply. I need stuff to make stuff. That kind of thing. Example, university needs what? Students. Where do they come from? High schools, right? Actually, some years ago, I got into the supply chain concept with the local engineering education unit next door, what's known as the Southern New Mexico Mathematics Science Achievement Academy, the SEMA, Science Engineering Math Achievement Academy. See, we have plenty of initialisms around here and abbreviations and acronyms, and remembering them all, you need the dictionary, right? Okay, in any event, it's a whole bunch of people from NASA in Cleveland, the Stokes Center, came out, and everyone was so pleased because I said, they were saying, well, Dr. Pines here works with us a lot, and they said, why? And I said, I think of it as assuring my supply chain. They loved that. Nonetheless, if there aren't elementary school kids, someday there aren't college kids and so forth. All right. So factory, this schematic's in the book. It didn't copy well. Distribution center. This is what the authors call a multi-level distribution model. I have one I'm going to share with you in a minute. But fundamentally, if you think about it, say you're buying some consumer good, TV sets, computers, whatever you like. They get made somewhere, they move to somewhere else, then they move to the store, then they move to you. Now, of course, most people don't pay attention to supply chain, right? Why? The U.S. economy is fairly robust to all kinds of things, and there's plenty of TVs out there, right? You don't find the one you like at Best Buy, you go down the street, right? This is not like some old Soviet Union type economy where you have to get online on bread day or something like that. Pretty much the supply chain in the U.S. economy is pretty robust, right? The nature of it working is quite complex, but it's robust to all kinds of things. As to whether it will stay robust is now endlessly a source of discussion. But definitely, even something like you go down a supermarket and go to the produce section, you can find all kinds of produce made in all kinds of places, right? Grown, not manufactured, obviously. It's all a supply chain. Essentially, it's the same idea as this. So, to give you an example of a real one, I had mentioned our friend's homegrown cotton a while back. This is that guy's 8th generation cotton farmer in South Carolina. Apparently he has an ancestor who was duking it out with the British during the Revolutionary War, who was the first cotton planter there. Okay? So I don't know how the generation thing works. It says the 8th generation. I'm not a genealogist. I mean, it sounded to me like maybe he should be further down the chain, but we'll leave that to people who investigate genealogy. He grows his cotton they have to plant it in May. And they pick it in October, November. And he's in a couple of counties in South Carolina. Assuming he picks the cotton and it looks good, because it has to be a certain level of quality to become a polo shirt. Okay, it goes to a gin in South Carolina where they separate those of you that follow the Dr. Vaya's show know she's been screwing around with cotton seeds and stuff like that. Basically, the cotton, as I understand it, and I like to joke that no one could easily exceed me in ignorance of agriculture. Basically, they pick this fluffy-looking stuff, then they gin it. All right? So this is your History 201 on the NMSU campus, early America. Okay, Eli Whitney and the cotton gin, got it? Cool. This is much more sophisticated. That's also in South Carolina. Then it gets spun into thread. And that's done at an outfit in North Carolina. Then it gets made into fabric. And just to keep this on one page, we'll go to the left. Then it goes back to a place and gets made into raw fabric in South Carolina. Then it goes to, and that's done in North Carolina. Okay, and just to give you an idea, this is a product that you don't think much about, right? You might say, geez, my polos look kind of ratty. I hope the college gives out some new polos or something like that. Or maybe I should go down to the mall and buy some. But you don't think about it much, right? And look at all, this is roughly the steps. Because notice where the buttons come from. And the thread, they're not even in. Because the outfit that makes it into a shirt, they've got a machine. I watched a little video to make this up. A machine that vibrates the buttons and rolls them out and sets it on the shirt, and then the sewing machine operator hits a button and bam, it gets sewn to the shirt. It's a masterpiece of mechanical design. I mean, it looks like it's from, I don't know, 100 years ago, but it's impressive to watch. But in any event, think about it. Everywhere along this chain, what's happening? There's a task, right? Now, it's an agricultural product, cotton, right? So that means if something happens with the weather and screws this up, he may be out of cotton. And you can't very well advertise homegrown cotton if you got your cotton from some other place, right? The gin has a schedule. You have to get there when you have your slot in the schedule. Same thing with these guys, these guys, these guys. All along the way, even dyeing the stuff takes time. So this whole story about inventory, all along the way, somewhere our friend Mr. McIntosh has to do what? He has to figure out how many polo shirts he can sell. Then somehow he has to forecast how much cotton to grow to make that many polo shirts. Now, fortunately, as I understand it, what he did was figure this business out as part of an MBA program he was doing. So it's not like he woke up one morning and said, I think I'll make polo shirts for a living. It's more like the cotton farm was there for the 8th generation, since 1765 or whatever, and now he thought, basically, you can probably backfill what went on. Lately, there's been interest in American-made. For example, Shinola products are a consumer good that recently had a renaissance of sorts. And the idea is that things are made in Detroit, or Filson hunting and outdoor apparel made in Seattle, that kind of thing. So he was surfing that sort of enthusiasm with this business plan. Homegrown cotton became the name. But I just happened to pick on this because polo shirts are easy. Everyone knows what they look like, right? We could easily do this for some radar part, but then, you know, who would know what it looks like, right? But, like, if you think about a polo shirt that you own, you don't think of that as requiring all this scheduling, planning, forecasting, transportation, and so forth, right? But that's really how it happens. And polo shirts are easy in the sense that it's a fairly basic product. It only has a few parts. And you notice how I happen to not know where the buttons came from. That's because the article I reviewed and the video I watched didn't have anything on the buttons. I had thought of emailing them and asking, but I figured we could just go with, they're pretty nice. I emailed him and he actually answered me himself. So at first I was looking at it and I said, the person signed themselves AT or at, which I learned subsequently is short for Atwood, which is his first name. Don't run into a lot of Atwoods in New Mexico, but see how it goes. Okay, so just as an example, here's a real-world supply chain. And there's a start before this because the cotton has to have what? You need seeds. And you need all the technology that keeps the cotton growing, right? Then you need the technology that picks it and gets it to the gin, and so forth. So, example of a supply chain. Managing this supply chain is not an easy task, right? Because what Mr. McIntosh had to do to start this business was, his goal was to have that homegrown cotton thing, and he wanted actually to have everything done in South Carolina, and it turned out he couldn't get it done that way. He had to go to North Carolina, which I gather is not his favorite idea, because he wanted, in fact, the shirts have a little outline of a cotton ball kind of thing and a map of South Carolina on it. Now, why is this important, you wonder? And the answer is the real product. You can see how doing this could be a lot harder than you think now, right? Like, you think in terms of, like, I go down to Old Navy or Dillard's or wherever you might go and give them my card, and I get 3 blue shirts in size large or something, right? And he's not even coordinating with a manufacturer who's located in Vietnam or China, with the added aggravation of waiting for it to clear customs and things like that. So the whole planning and scheduling thing becomes more complicated than this, potentially. This is actually straightforward. So, a supply chain. Example from the real world. All along the way, what's the problem? Use less resources, incur less risk. If we had unlimited funds, then, and use of the funds cost us nothing, then this wouldn't be an issue, right? Even as we discover the United States government does have limits on how much funds it has. And they've done some colossal things that didn't quite work. So our goal is essentially, we deploy all the math and computers to help us not overinvest and over-resource. The only reason to hire people to do all this modeling and simulation is to do these things. No matter how complex the model, fundamentally what it's trying to do is A, reduce risk exposure, B, reduce stock-out exposure, C, minimize investment. So no matter how complex we get, we're still back to the same thing. We're trying to be cheap people. Fundamentally. Frugal, if you will. And everyone always says, why? And I said, well, we don't want to buy stuff we won't need, one. Number two, we don't want to be doing things before we need to. And why is that? Well, things can change. They can become obsolete. They can have shelf lives, right? it all rotates around reduce how much money we spend, what credit we consume doing things. So if you those of you who took ie524 have heard that speech, or 382. You hear that speech from me all the time. It's like, don't use up money you don't have to use up, because you're going to need it for something else. So the goal of all the modeling is to keep you from spending money you could spend elsewhere. Students, I tend to joke, often don't learn this lesson very well. I was a student once. I'm not keeping myself separate from that. What do you do when you're an undergrad? Yes, waste lots of time, right? Part of that's just growing up, right? Well, when I was a grad student, the amount of time people spent just hanging out in the labs and in the TA offices was unbelievable, right? Everybody's busy, right? And what are you doing? Busy? You're discussing what a jerk the professor is, or something like, you know, or the football team, or something, right? See, time, I like to tell people, is a resource you're never going to get more of. So think about it carefully. As we talk about the details of the model, what you should be thinking about is, how does this help me do my business? How does it help with the polo shirts? When they pick the cotton, they have to deliver it to the gin in some form. The gin can efficiently process the cotton and so forth. Now, I've had this explained to me. New Mexico, southern New Mexico grows a lot of cotton, and I've had it sort of explained to me more than once by people. We have the USDA Cotton Gin Lab on campus, and I'm still mystified, so I'll just leave it at, it has to show up in an appropriate form. Okay, so inventory costs. We went through these. We'll keep going through these again and again. What does it cost me to place an order? What does it cost me to keep things around? A good example, by the way, of storage and failure to plan for storage, if you're on campus, take a look around Foreman Engineering Complex and look at how we have to store things. There are no storage facilities, which was, guess what? Unwise. But it does cost money to run storage. If you have a lot of stuff and you rent a storage locker away from your home, that costs money. Same thing if you're Exxon or Raytheon. If they need to build a warehouse and keep things around, that's floor space. They're now heating, lighting, potentially, depending on whatever. When I discuss this, I always mention the Kiva robot videos. Which you should have guessed you can see on YouTube. But every so often I mention them. Check out the Kiva robot videos. And so where would I find those? And I say, I don't know, YouTube, right? Yeah, actually, if you want to see a warehouse that's cleverly designed, take a look at those videos. The Kiva robots look sort of like a, I don't know, like a dishwasher on wheels with a little attachment that sort of pops up and picks up the thing and then moves it to a pick station. It's quite entertaining. It'll help you in an interview. You can show something to talk about. Storage retrieval systems. It's actually a wonder of computer science, IE and EE, that thing. Because these things run all around the Zappos warehouse and various other places. And there are algorithms so they don't hit each other. And I mean, it's just a wonderland of all this stuff. So if you have a facility, you got to maintain it. You got to keep people from taking things they shouldn't. Obsolescence. In highly engineered high-tech products, people want the latest and greatest. Well, as you start breaking in new components in the engineering design, you may make things obsolete, which means you built a whole bunch of circuit cards that are now good for nothing. They can deteriorate. We have transportation costs. Our friends at Homegrown Cotton, their transportation costs probably involve trucks running back and forth on roads in the Carolinas, right? But if you have to fly something in, it gets more expensive. You have to ship it, send it on a rail car, what have you. Another good piece of terminology to remember with transportation is mode. Multimodal facilities are facilities that take things off one mode of transportation and put them on another. For example, take them off a ship and put them on a rail car. About 40 miles south of here, the Union Pacific spent $500 million building a multimodal facility in Santa Teresa. So that's a rail and truck facility, obviously, since the ocean doesn't hit this area, or not recently anyway, right? But transportation modes are important in this, because how you transport things has a lot to do with how your costs go. Yes, I know you can overnight anything, but the other side of that is it costs a lot of money. So, any event, how you do it adds to your costs. We have stock out costs, back orders, or lost sales. Capital costs. Imagine, if you will, you were making those polo shirts. What do you have to do? Well, for starters, you got to plant the fields, right? So money has to come from somewhere. And then you got to do all the things related to planting the fields. Then you got to pick the cotton, right? And the whole time from when he plants the seeds until he harvests the cotton, exactly how much money is coming in? Zip, nada, zilch, right? He's running a big deficit, correct? Then eventually he's able to sell it. However he sells his cotton. Same idea with the Raytheons of the world. They need parts to make radar systems. How do they buy them? They have to get money from the bank. You start a firm to do something, you borrow money from grandma, who charges you 18% and forecloses and fires you, right? As soon as the company's doing well, you're out, right? Okay, that's my other class. Well, we'll leave that alone. But yeah, if you think about it, how does anybody do anything? They got to go get the money, right? They either have to have the money or get it from someone, correct? Because otherwise, how are you paying for your inventory? Like, say you need, I don't know, I-beams. They come in 12 or 20-foot lengths. You define them by certain sizes. The people who sell you the I-beams, they need to get paid. You have to have money to pay for the inventory. So in theory, and this didn't copy well, my apologies. This is from the textbook. At the supply level, we're thinking about what vendors do I pick and do they do their job? The logistics of bringing this stuff in. Where do I get raw materials from? Useful stuff, right? Where do I get this stuff from? How do I know it's any good, right? When I'm operating my plant, then I schedule my production. MRP. Material requirements plan. When do I need the stuff to do what I need to do? Controlling my inventory in process, which means not losing things in the plant, which is easy to do in many cases. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to lose things in big facilities. Capacity plans has to do with, do I have the capacity to do the job? Or do I need to hire more people, have a bigger facility, that kind of thing. And we'll talk about that later in the semester. Then we distribute the stuff. There's some forecasting, where's the stuff go, how much, customer service, controlling the finished goods. And of course, our friend, the outbound logistics. How do you get the thing to the customer? It happens I have a friend who works for FedEx Ground, and one day I was talking to him, and I asked him, to his great annoyance, I could tell. He didn't want to hear that question. I said, explain something to me, my man. And he said, what? And he said, you guys have this FedEx Ground Postal Service thing. Okay? And a lot of companies, when they say they give you free shipping, they use either what's called UPS SurePost or the FedEx version of it. And what that is it's a relatively slow speed delivery. And so I had noticed, to my great amusement, that a thing I had ordered from an outfit in San Francisco went from California to Dallas, where it was given to the post office, where it went to eventually to me. And I said, that sounds kind of foolish, because New Mexico is somewhere in between San Francisco, California, and Dallas, Texas. And he just muttered, people don't want to pay for shipping. And I said, aha! I get it completely. If I paid extra, you would not just marshal it at one big location. He says, ding, 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 ding. How do you deliver stuff to people? This almost never is a problem in your daily life, right? But think about this. Suppose your company makes weightlifting equipment. Stuff's heavy, right? Can't stick it in a box and send it UPS. It has to come on a truck, which means you have to have loading and unloading equipment. Now, if you've been paying attention to this, you're seeing the picture completely. When it gets to your house, how does it get off the truck and into your house? What that suggests is you should read carefully before ordering online as to how it's getting in your house, because they may actually be willing to deliver it to your front door, which on a very small scale is a serious logistics problem, right? Because if you got some 500-600 pound thing, getting it in your front door could be a little challenging, right? Now, I just happen to pick on that one to make a point, but how you get the parts to the customer or the product you make to the customer is a big deal. How does it get there? How do you know it will get there? Can even be a problem. It may disappear on the way. Any number of Hollywood versions of World War II include fairly entrepreneurial supply people who are moving things from place to place for various benefits. So, any event, things getting to where they're supposed to go is a big deal. Now, this is not a recent innovation, by the way. One thing I tell people is that a lot of the stuff you think just got invented has been around for a very long time. In fact, when the people in New York City were building the Empire State Building, famously there was a deal with steel mills in Pittsburgh and the Pennsylvania Railroad that had steel being made somewhere around 12 hours before it went up on the building. It was finished. Stick it right on the train, run the train to Jersey City, take it across the river, throw it right up on the building. That was 1930. So it wasn't undoable, it just was very expensive. Now with information technology and better modeling, it's cheaper to do. We've seen this before, and what the product mix is that you make, where are the facilities, how are you going to do it, that's a 1 to 5 year plan. Six to 12 months out, typically we think about aggregates, which is how we're going to actually do things. And then in the short run, we're thinking, these are people who have to come to work on Monday. That kind of thing. I need material here. Now, if you're building a building and you need steel, well, you're definitely probably planning this much further out. Because if you need enough of it, you need to make sure somebody is going to make it to sell it to you. Now, if all you're looking for is the stuff that is commonly stocked, it's not a big deal. If you're looking for something special, you better be thinking further out. So again, before we go forward, I keep reminding people of this. Years of teaching senior design classes has taught me that no one pays attention to this process. Everyone thinks it just happens. I can't tell you how many people said, well, at Intel, they just have it available. I said, and how did they do that? Well, okay, so we forecast the thing, and at some point we actually design what we're going to sell, right? It may be in parallel with this, it might not. You have to document the configuration of the thing. This is one thing students don't pay enough attention to in general. Configuration, because it's like a 3 or 4 person lab group, right? What's going into the product? Now, if you want an example of configuration that's nice and easy, consider baking cookies or a cake. If you decide to add, as I explained in quality control, if you want the cake to taste better, it helps if you add more fat. A little more oil, a few more eggs, right? Aunt so-and-so's cake is really moist, right? Does she care about a couple of pennies in oil and eggs? No. Why? Reputation. No one wants to be known as cheap, right? If you're making cakes, 100,000 at a time, a couple more pennies a cake is a lot of money, right? So you got to control what goes into the thing. You don't let people randomly decide to change the recipe, right? In some cases, it's a major problem. There is a really interesting legal case working its way through the system about airbags. Yes, a discouraging topic indeed. Takata airbags, source of many ethics cases for the future. It turns out that these airbags are in all kinds of cars, and now there's some suggestion that the manufacturers who let them stay in the car and continue to design them in actually knew of the risk, which is even more worrisome. It turns out that the airbags are, with the explosive propellant that tends to blow unscheduled, are about 1/3 cheaper than the safer alternative. So knowing which cars have those airbags is a very expensive problem, because a lot of them have to be taken out, essentially disarmed, taken out of the car, new airbag put in. A lot of inconvenience, right? Regrettably, a lot of people didn't survive the airbag. So this is serious stuff, knowing what's in the thing. Got to have a facility. You need manufacturing drawings, CAD files, if you will, bills of material that describe the product. How does it go together? That's important because a lot of the industrial and manufacturing engineering people have to figure out how to build the thing, how it will be done, what kinds of tools and fixtures are needed, develop the standard methods. Again, if you want to bake cake, for example, and you decide you want to try it at 400 degrees, who's going to stop you? No one. If you're baking cakes for, I don't know, Sara Lee or something like that, they have to all be the same. You don't let people be creative per se. Not that you don't try to improve the process, but you don't have uncontrolled process modifications. It can get you into a lot of grief. You're going to find some vendors and order parts and things like that, right? If you're baking cakes in an industrial setting, then you need somebody delivering an awful lot of eggs, right? And they have to all be treated the same way. We order parts, we make the thing, right? The carrot cake slides off at the end, cools, is put in a box, shipped to the supermarket distribution center, goes to the supermarket where you walk in and say, I'd like that carrot cake. Look, and it's only $2.99. Bring it home, and now you're what? Potentially writing on Yelp that some idiot left this says the carrot cake has nuts in it. There were no nuts. I just happen to pick on that, but it's a perfectly reasonable problem, right? If we go back far enough, if somebody didn't order the nuts, right? Or somebody said, you know, I don't like nuts in cake, so I'll change the recipe. It gets to your house. It's not right. People write on Yelp. They write your customer service person, endless. And we mentioned two kinds of major order policies. One is make to stock, one is make to order. If you go to work for Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or Boeing or one of those companies, then make to order is the idea of the day. You go to work for a cake company or Hershey, make the stock. Think about it. If you're making a $35 million aircraft or whatever those things cost, it's kind of hard to keep a few around for someone who wanders in to buy one, right? It's just not the way you can do business. Alternatively, what would be a make-to-order model in a cake? Just to make this clear to everyone. How about a wedding cake? Or a quinceañera, right? Big cake, special decorating, right? Or what's the guy in Baltimore, Ace of Cakes? Duff Goldman? Used to have a show where he'd make all those special cakes. Those are make to order. In fact, I went to his website a couple years ago. I was teaching this stuff, and I checked out what his order policies are. They're quite restrictive. You don't get to just call up, and he has quite a queue, too. Charm City Cakes is the company's name. But yeah, like you get married, you have 150 guests, you have big cake, that's a make-to-order model. Alternatively, cakes that you get out of the freezer department of the supermarket are make-to stock. Somebody orders them, and they go to the individual supermarkets. This is the most famous calculation, I say, in inventory. And all it is adding and subtracting. Occasional multiply. The reason it's called netting is I look at my gross demand and I net out what I have. And that tells me what to order. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Doesn't seem like you'd need a lot of calculus to do this, right? No statistics, no big deal. How many do I need? How many do I have? Make or buy, whatever. It's a little like going on a shopping trip, right? Supermarket. You look in the refrigerator. What are you doing? You're theorizing how much, I don't know, Diet Coke you need, right? You could say, well, usually I like to have at least a 6-pack in there. 3 cans are left. Say, oh, I should have 3, but you can't buy 3, so I'll buy 6. I now have 9 cans in stock. Your roommate has a party without you. People drink all your Diet Coke. Implausible? Not at all, right? What have you just experienced? besides a sneaking roommate and friends, right? They had a party while you were studying and drank all your Diet Coke. You're out of stock. That's what I call pilferage. Can this happen? Sure. Imagine, if you will, you have a factory that has 4 or 5 product lines, all of whom use some component. Could people grab what's left over and use it on their product line and there's none for you? Sure. And that's what we'll see. But fundamentally, nice and controlled, how many do I need? How many do I have? How many do I buy or make? If we go back to my Diet Coke example for a minute, if you knew your roommate was having a party, you could do what? Buy 2 6-packs, pick up the $3 from your roommate, right, for the extra 6-pack, and say, keep your paws off my soda. Correct? That's a preventative inventory strategy. Now, obviously, when I put it like that, it sounds trivial and trite. But fundamentally, that's what people are doing every day. They're trying to guess, how many do I need, how many do I have, and how many should I get? When they do that, sometimes they create something called the bullwhip effect. And this is in the chapter. You can tell I didn't make that, right? Just didn't copy well. But yeah, this is in the chapter. That fundamentally, what would happen? Yeah, it didn't come out at all, right?
The original was nice. Yeah, the original was nice.
Yeah, it didn't come out well. I know. I haven't quite conquered that. Because actually what happens is the slides that come with the book for faculty, they use a blue background. And that may be intentional to keep people from doing this kind of thing, for all I know. Which is probably not what they want, right? They want me to have it on an overhead and you see it in color. But, okay. The reason I mentioned your roommate and the Diet Coke is that could create, in a different world, what's called the bullwhip effect, where you order extra and then that triggers extra to be made and so forth. Because if we over-forecast our demand, people respond to the over-forecast. And it's hard to picture that with Diet Coke, but you could easily do that with some other product. I mean, because you go down to a supermarket, they've got more than enough Diet Coke. But what do people do? They over-order. And what that does is cause everybody's demand to go different. They batch orders. The price changes, and you start to do what's called shortage gaming. Now, where you can see this is when there's a shock to petroleum prices. You see a lot of gaming around petroleum. Because what do people do? They don't want to run out, right? So they overbuy, right? See, if you think about it, as long as you can buy gas relatively efficiently, if you let your tank run down to almost empty, it might not be great for the car, but you can do that, right? Whereas if you are always running, if there is a shortage of product available, you tend to buy more, which tends to make the lines longer and so forth. And that's really what they're talking about. Typically, what happens, and there's different games that in other classes people will play, the most famous of which is called the beer game, which is, this becomes a systems dynamics feedback loop problem. Now, unfortunately, due to the method by which we deliver this class, it's kind of hard to play the beer game. But it would be quite instructional. Because what happens is there's a change in consumer demand, which leads to an overbuy, which leads to an over-delivery, which leads to overmaking of product, and then when the bottom falls out of the consumer demand, the thing goes down the tubes fast. So generally, what people talk about is the idea of sharing information and aligning how you get stuff. But in the early 1970s, the first oil shortage occurred from OPEC. And I remember people like my parents, since I couldn't drive at the time, had all sorts of strategies for how to buy gasoline. They did what's called shortage gaming. And then there were all sorts of strategies for how to deal with things and so forth. But fundamentally what it was there was a cutoff in delivery. Most products these days, you don't have that problem. But interestingly enough, one good example of oversupply at the moment, based on petroleum prices, is plastics recycling. Okay, we have all those blue pails around Las Cruces. You may have them, right? Well, recycling plastics only makes sense if the cost of the recycling is cheaper than the cost of doing it with new oil, right? It's like lots of people talk about glass recycling, but there's a limited amount of recycling that can be done with glass. So you don't see glass containers all over town. I mean, you can find one out at the dump, but it takes a little bit of effort. And that's because the price isn't worth it. It's like actually cheaper to dump it in a landfill than it is to do something with it. But yeah, right now, watching people with plastics recycling, I think the sustainability people will have me silenced forever or something if I keep telling you this. But what's happened is it's actually cheaper at the moment to do it with new oil than it is to recycle the plastic. And that's an inventory kind of problem just like this, because everybody gets enthusiastic about recycling. It creates a big pile of stuff to be recycled that it's not cost effective to recycle. What's key in all this is money. You have to be able to spend money to buy things. Somebody has to believe you'll pay. So even if you buy on credit, they have to believe you actually will pay. Imagine the following. Even something like, oh, I don't know, say you're working for Lockheed Martin building airplanes in Fort Worth. In order to buy aluminum and steel and all those other exotic materials that they use, what do you have to have? Money. To do it. Now, one last thing about netting. Let's say in time period 5, I want to deliver 100 widgets to the customer. That's my forecast, right? The first thing I got to figure out is how many do I have on hand, if I have any, in period 5, right? It's like imagining you're going to have the party next weekend. You need a 6-pack of Diet Coke in the refrigerator, correct? How many cans are expected to be there next Saturday? If somebody overdoes it during the week, you run out, correct? Let's say there's 100 on hand right then, and we use up 10 a week. And say it takes 2 time periods to make the thing. 100 minus 60 is 40, right? Can you picture this? Right? Simple add and subtract, right? I need 100. I have 60. Go back 2 periods, order 40. Right? That works. What's the key to this? This line has to work like this. Otherwise, I have what? Too many or not enough. Both of which are going to cost me something. We'll explore this more next time. This is fascinating to think about, though. because what we're trying to do is manage what we use while we manage what we order to meet what we think is the customer demand. We're out of time. Have a good day, everyone.